Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with If I Could Choose Only One Work by composer X, it would have to be work H. Well, composer X is BIBER, the great Baroque composer, early Baroque composer. He lived from like 1644 to 1704. And the work in question is the Sonata Violino Solo Representativa, the Representative Violin Sonata. Now, this was suggested by one of you, and I really appreciate the suggestion. You were dead on. There have not been very many BIBER suggestions. The obvious choice for BIBER would have been the Rosary Sonatas, which is a series of a whole pile of like a dozen violin sonatas based on the mysteries of the Rosary, using scordatura tuning, which is where you tune the strings to different pitches and play them in different ways. And it's got all kinds of cool stuff. And they are marvelous works. But there's a whole series of systematic works like that BIBER wrote that are really quite extraordinary and well worth exploring. Heaven knows. I mean, when we ask the evil god Cancrozans not to destroy all of classical music but one work per composer, we have to say, wait a minute. Look at all this other good stuff that BIBER wrote. But one of you pointed out that this was the logical choice, and I can only agree, and I really appreciate that. I really do. Because the Sonata Representativa represents the birth of program music, first of all, and second of all, the birth of the romantic Baroque German school of virtuoso violin technique. You have to remember the Baroque period was a period of great expansion in the schools of violin playing and orchestral and instrumental playing generally. It was the birth of instrumental music generally. I mean, music really written for specific instruments to show what they could do. I mean, that's when this happened in the Baroque period. It all got notated. Before, instruments were there to accompany voices. I mean, that's what they did. And there were always instrumental pieces. But instrumental virtuosity for its own sake had not been cultivated until people like BIBER came along and went completely nuts because he was an extraordinary violinist. And his violin sonatas are evidence of that, of course. But the Sonata Solo Representativa is marvelous because it shows just what you can do with a violin to be programmatic, to represent other things. And the things are mostly animals. You've got birds. There's like a cuckoo and a hen and a nightingale and things like that. Then there's a frog, and there's a cat, and then there's a musketeer march and a sort of concluding dance thing. So you've got a whole sequence of little vignettes. They're quite short. The scope of instrumental music in those days was really very, very limited, and pieces were only a minute or two long or even less. And these various sections go by fairly quickly, but they are extremely graphic and lots of fun to listen to, and full of humor and character and charm. And so it's an absolutely delicious work that is so completely new and fresh and brilliant coming from this wonderful composer. Now, BIBER wrote things on the largest scale as well. I mean, he's now thought to be the composer of the Missa Salisburgensis, which is like the largest Baroque setting of the Mass that we have. It's like for 64 parts or something. It's got multiple choirs all screaming at each other and billions of Baroque people doing things Baroquely. I mean, it's glorious. It's absolutely glorious. Masterpiece. And there are other pieces like that, too. He wrote in, the sacred music he wrote for Salzburg, which is where he spent a lot of his career. It is on a huge scale, but it's more intimate stuff. And that's another reason, by the way, that we cannot, destroy all of music but for one work. We're not going to lose the Mrs. Salisburgensis. Good heavens, no. But his real achievement was in codifying and sort of developing the resources of instrumental music on a small scale, on an intimate scale, because big orchestras such as we know them today did not exist. There wasn't really orchestral music as we know it in the late 17th century. But what you could do was exploit the resources of individual instruments. And BIBER was one of the great virtuoso violinists. And the Sonata Violino Solo Representativa is just the bee's knees. Other, it doesn't have any bees. Or knees, actually. It's all the other critters, but it's just one of those marvelous examples of early program music and violin virtuosity that we have. And it deserves the widest possible exposure. So keep on listening, friends. Thank you so much for joining me. Take care.